LDF was formed in 1940 and was driven by the vision of a set of attorneys who believed in something that didn't yet exist, that they could end Jim Crow, that they could end segregated America, that they could give the words of the 14th Amendment, which requires equal protection of laws to all persons, real meaning.
This is a dangerous moment in our country's history.
This president traffics in racism.
These aren't people. These are animals.
And is fueled by bullying.
There's been an attack on the press.
The fake news, the enemy of the people.
We see attacks on the courts.
You want this seat? I hope you never get it.
We're gonna plow right through it.
A undermining of norms, an undermining of the rule of law.
Donald Trump fans the flames of political violence.
Any guy that can do a body slam, he's my kind.
The president is using immigration to stoke fears.
They want to open your borders, let people in. Caravans. You have people coming up from the Middle East and other places that are not appropriate for our country.
The current administration is separating families from their children at our border with Mexico.
This administration is pushing forward an agenda of white supremacy.
You know what I am? I'm a nationalist, okay? I'm a nationalist.
The toxic climate that this administration has unleashed.
He complained that the 15,000 Haitian immigrants who received visas in 2017 all have AIDS.
The last thing we need to do is to monkey this up.
I'm not going to get into it because we won. It doesn't matter. We won.
Investigation has been launched to find out who sent those 10 bombs to critics of President Trump.
Just 15 minutes before Gregory Bush shot and killed 2 African-American shoppers, First Baptist cameras showed him pulling on their door handles, trying to get inside.
11 people died and 6 others were injured in the racist and murderous attack at the Tree of Life Synagogue during Saturday services, likely the deadliest attack ever on an American Jewish community.
And now we've reached a point in which individual white citizens regard themselves as deputized constabulary to control and circumvent the public behavior of African Americans. We've seen white individuals calling the police because they don't believe that African Americans belong at a community pool, or because they don't think that African Americans should be selling water or lemonade, that African Americans do not belong in particular spaces that they think are assigned to them.
I have every right to call the police. You cannot sleep in that room.
These are profound and deep issues that go to the very heart of African American citizenship in this country.
We are experiencing an unprecedented number of attacks on our democratic values. And it's coming from almost every part of society.
Since the election of 2016, an entirely new front has opened up in our work. And that front is the federal government. We filed 5 lawsuits against cabinet secretaries. That's a first in LDF's history. And of course, we sued the president himself. The Department of Justice, since the creation of the Civil Rights Division in 1957, has been understood to have a vital and important role in enforcing the nation's civil rights laws, whether there's a Republican president or a Democratic president. LDF has stood shoulder to shoulder with the Department of Justice in enforcing those laws. And what we're seeing with this Department of Justice is how easily we can roll back the progress that we've made over the last 50 or 60 years. An entire agency of our government has shifted its position to essentially do the opposite of what it was chartered to do.
Every major area of civil rights law since Brown versus Board of Education, decisions in housing, voting, education, affirmative action, rights of criminal defendants, every single one of those areas could be in jeopardy.
We decided was that we had to become a private DOJ.
LDF has stepped into new areas that we haven't worked in before. We have a nimbleness.
We have been able to expand our litigation capacity to be able to bring the cases that need to be brought, to litigate the matters that need to be litigated in this era that what I like to call the new abnormal.
And I'm really proud of the way we have stepped into the breach.
We convened a group of student groups and alumni groups from Harvard, kind of a multiracial coalition, to say that they support affirmative action in Harvard.
What we signed up for is to help them think through what is the relationship that they should be having with the communities in which their stores sit.
Facebook has some responsibility to make sure the content that's on its platform is not used in a way that undermines the votes of African Americans, period.
In 2010, Haiti was hit by one of the most devastating earthquakes in modern history. It killed hundreds of thousands. It left millions homeless.
The Obama administration decided to grant temporary protective status.
TPS allows Haitians to live and work in the United States while the country recovers. But unfortunately, the Trump administration took a different view of things.
Trump said, why are we having all these people from shithole countries come here?
The Trump administration is ending the temporary protected status program for tens of thousands of Haitians.
This decision was essentially based on race discrimination.
So we decided to bring a lawsuit against the Department of Homeland Security for intentional discrimination in their rescission of temporary protected status for Haitians.
This administration has pushed to include a citizenship question on the census. Many people concerned about their citizenship being questioned will be deterred from participating in the census.
Adding the citizenship status question is another way to undermine the accuracy of the census for communities of color.
And the census is the foundation to redistricting. How our lines are drawn for congressional representation, for state representation, for local representation, and all of that translates into political power.
So what LDF is doing is part of our mission, educating people about the census, why it matters, why they should be participating.
There are elected officials operating in states around this country who are convening and passing legislation for the express purpose of keeping African Americans and Latinos from voting and participating in the political process. The Alabama voter ID case is just a perfect example of voter suppression.
Our experts found that Black and Latino voters are about 2 times more likely than white voters to lack the required photo ID.
These are legislators who had called Black people illiterates and aborigines and said they were passing laws to try and fight the Black power structure. So there's no confusion about what this law was meant to do.
And it is one among many cases in which we have recognized this new wave of voter suppression that has taken hold of this country really since 2013.
And those include moving polling places, changing election days where people are unlikely to participate, setting up photo ID laws or proof of citizenship requirements, redistricting so that their voices are diminished. It is a gambit of stratagems.
Waller County, Texas keeps coming up with new ways to try to keep students at that college from voting. Dozens of Black senior citizens southeast of Atlanta were ordered off a bus bound for the polls for early voting.
Abrams is currently suing Kemp for suppressing votes in the election that he is both running in and overseeing.
There are several lawsuits and demands being made of Brian Kemp. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund sent a strong letter to the governor and to Brian Kemp himself demanding that he recuse himself from this process. Effectively, we have the fox guarding the hen house. And right now, Kemp has 53,000 feathers on his lips.
For a decade, LDF has been doing on-the-ground monitoring on Election Day to ensure that every voter who we interact with is able to cast a ballot. So we will be in 7 states for this upcoming election, in Alabama, in Louisiana, in South Carolina, in Texas, in Georgia, in Missouri, and in Florida, protecting Black voters.
In his first 9 months, this president, Mr. Trump, has named 58 judges to the federal bench, more than twice as many as President Obama in the same period. They are packing them in.
We sat in the Senate Judiciary Committee as various judicial nominees were asked the question whether they thought Brown versus Board of Education was correctly decided, and heard several of those nominees refuse to answer that question.
Respectfully, not comment
Brown is part of the central canon. It now essentially reflects your belief in the rule of law. It ended legal apartheid in this country.
After years of drift to the left, that's my opinion, drift to the left, the courts are on the middle of a reboot.
The judges, they are there forever.
Some of them are far right, but it's also that many of them lack the basic qualifications.
Wait, there's a lot more.
He's appointing very young judges. On average, they're 8 years younger than the people President Obama put on the appellate courts.
That means they stay on the bench for decades to come.
Any nominee to the Supreme Court gets the LDF treatment. We do a deep dive into the record of that nominee. LDF spent months examining the available record of Judge Brett Kavanaugh, and we produced a 97-page report about his civil rights record. We make no apology for the fact that we vigorously opposed Brett Kavanaugh. The United States Supreme Court at this moment is now solidly conservative. Do we pack up our toolbox and go home? No. Many of LDF's greatest victories and wins occurred at a time when justices on the court were not particularly liberal. In fact, very often it was the work that we did pulling justices and compelling justices to recognize and accept the claims we brought before them. Besides the Department of Justice, there's no other organization that's litigated more cases in the United States Supreme Court than LDF.
We've had over 700 cases, so our investment in the integrity of the Supreme Court is quite profound.
There are still cases that we can win, and we also recognize there are cases that we won't win. And that requires that we then conduct ourselves in a way that is more strategic than ever before. Our job is to position LDF to do work that makes us as transformative in the 21st century as we were in the 20th century. Think about what we were able to accomplish in the 20th century, with Thurgood Marshall having as his goal breaking the back of Jim Crow. When the forces of the federal government, the most powerful government in the world, are arrayed against the project of equality and justice and democracy, is precisely the moment in which we get to prove that we can be as transformative.